Well, I got my love of film from my grandfather. Papa would always take me to the movies I wanted to see pretty much from the time I was about 6 years old up until I was a teenager. Then as an adult, I tried to return the favor as often as I could. The last movie I took him to before he died was Christopher Nolan's epic 2017 film, Dunkirk. Now, Papa grew up during the Second World War and loved war movies. And Dunkirk had gotten excellent reviews. And it had been phenomenally popular, but you know what? I hate spoilers. So I didn't read any of those reviews in depth. That meant that we were completely unprepared for the most distinctive thing about this movie, which is the fact that it is not a linear narrative. It's actually 3 separate stories, one centered on soldiers on the shore at Dunkirk, another on a small boat in the English Channel, and a third story of RAF fighter pilots. Now, these stories eventually connect in the end, but what makes the whole thing such a unique experience, if you haven't seen the movie, and I hope I'm not spoiling a 7-year-old film, but each story happens over a very different time span. The story set on land takes place over a full week. The story set on the boat takes place over a single 24-hour day. The story up in the air happens over 1 hour. It's very disorienting the first time you watch the film, even if you figure it out part of the way through. While I enjoyed this effect, my papa did not. Even as he did appreciate a lot of other things about this movie. I mean, the cinematography and the acting are excellent. But I mean, at the end of the day, I think what he enjoyed most was the fact that we watched it together, as we had so many times before. And all of this means that Dunkirk does have a special place in my heart, even as I know that it's not going to be everyone's favorite film. You can do lots of interesting things with non-linear storytelling, but it's almost always a little disorienting. And this is something I think we can see in the way the New Testament presents the stories of Jesus' resurrection. Rather than a single linear account of all of Jesus' resurrection appearances to his friends in chronological order, the stories of the resurrection are spread over 4 different Gospels, the book of Acts, and one of Paul's letters. 6 different places in the New Testament. Some appearances are told in gorgeous detail. Others get a sentence or 2. Some are just a word or 2 in a list. Now, this isn't entirely surprising, as Acts frames these post-Easter appearances as happening over a period of 40 days, almost a month and a half. If they were all written down in full detail, and just the list that we have would be extensive, there would probably be enough to fill a few books just with resurrection stories, let alone anything else Jesus said or did. So what we have here in the New Testament are a select few stories chosen as the most important ones to pass on to future generations of Jesus' followers. Each writer chose just a few, and they mostly chose different ones. Now, these are stories that help us understand what the resurrection of Jesus means, stories that explain the continuing mission that Jesus has for us today. And they're stories that assure us that Jesus continues to lead, guide, and care for his friends, and that he is with us on this mission. These are all very important things, but they don't form a linear narrative. If you jump from one to the other, it can be a little disorienting. Which brings us to our story where we jump into the Gospel of John today. In 2024, we've been following the narrative of the Gospel of Mark. But we came to the end of that story between Easter and last Sunday. And as we did, I talked about the fact that Mark sets us up for a resurrection appearance of Jesus up in Galilee. He prepares us for it, but then it's one we never actually get in his book. But we do have a story about Jesus appearing in Galilee here in John, as well as another one in the Gospel of Matthew. So again, this is a little disorienting. A lot of people reading straight through the Gospel of John find it a bit confusing why Simon Peter and the other disciples are suddenly up in Galilee after Jesus appears to them in Jerusalem in chapter 20. And John doesn't bother to explain. Basically, we just jump right in. Afterward, however long afterward it is, Jesus appeared again to his disciples by the Sea of Galilee, and it happened in this way. Now, part of the reason John does this is chapter 21 is a bit of an epilogue to the gospel. It stands a bit on its own, even as it is carefully connected to the key themes in the rest of the book. But it can be a bit of a disorienting jump. Yet when we read John alongside the Gospel of Mark and Matthew 2, we can remember that Jesus told his friends to go up and find him in Galilee after he was raised. The appearances in Jerusalem were actually a bonus. And so perhaps after those experiences in Jerusalem, Peter and the others have now been up in Galilee for a few days, and they have not yet found Jesus. And so perhaps, not entirely sure what to do next, Peter decides to do something productive, something to pass the time, and goes fishing. Or maybe he's thinking of all the times with Jesus in that very fishing boat, going back and forth across the sea. Maybe he hopes that by going out here, Jesus will appear to them as he did when he walked on the water. We don't know. John doesn't tell us. He leaves this to sink into our minds as we read this story over and over again. What he does tell us is that the night's fishing proves unproductive. Perhaps it's a metaphor. They have seen Jesus in Jerusalem. They know that the mission continues, that Jesus is alive, and now anything is possible. They feel ready to get moving, but they don't know what comes next, and they're not quite sure what to do. They have gone where Jesus told them to go, and they haven't seen him yet. But suddenly, just as the sun is coming up over the horizon, Jesus appears and tells them what they need to do. Jesus stood on the shore, and the disciples didn't realize that it was him. He called out to them, "Friends, haven't you any fish?" "No," they answered. He said, "Throw your net on the right side of the boat and you will find some." When they did, they were unable to haul the net in because of the large number of fish. And then from there, the beloved disciple makes that ecstatic cry, "It is the Lord." Over the past year, we've reflected that one of the hardest things to do is to wait for God. To accept that his sense of time is not our sense of time. And to trust him that when the time is right, he will come to us. He will speak and he will act. This is difficult to do because, well, we are linear. We can only see this moment and what's immediately around us, and look back at what's already happened. But we cannot see the full picture, or how it's all going to come together in the end. And it can be very disorienting. Even if God does give us some general direction, it's still hard to wait and figure out what else to do once we've done what we think God has told us to do. Yet the story told in John 21 does highlight a few things to help us when we find ourselves in that place of waiting for what's next. The first thing is that it's important to act on however much information, how much light God has given us, even if it's not a lot, even if it's not particularly specific. Let's go back to that memory verse for this season after Easter. He's going ahead of you into Galilee. There you will see him, just as he told you. Now this is helpful. It gives them a direction and something to act on. But when we think about it, it's actually very open-ended. I mean, Galilee is a big place. And Jesus had taken the disciples through most of it during his ministry. It would be like Jesus telling us to go, I don't know, go to Brantford. Find me there. Where in Brantford? It's a small city, but I mean, how long could you or I spend walking around Brantford looking for something when we don't know where it is? And speaking of time, notice that Jesus and the angel didn't say when the disciples will see him or how long they have to wait. He just says, go to Galilee and you will see me there. I'm sure many in the group were feeling a bit unsure about all of this. Even after Jesus had appeared to them in Jerusalem and assured them that he truly was alive and active and could meet them. Yet in the end, they acted on the information they had and went up to Galilee. And God was faithful. Jesus was faithful. He met them and got them ready for the next stage of the journey. But it took trust. It took a willingness to act on limited information and to stick it out when it wasn't clear how long they would have to wait. The second thing is to do something worthwhile while we wait. The disciples could have just sat around in Peter and Andrew's house in Capernaum and done nothing. But they didn't. Peter decided to go out and fish. And others went with him. He did something worthwhile with the time. And something similar happens later in the opening chapter of the book of Acts. When the disciples are told by Jesus to wait in Jerusalem, they spend the time in prayer and active preparation. They pray and they do something while they wait. God rarely asks us to sit around and do nothing. Yes, it sometimes happens, but it's rare. But whether it is getting on with our daily routines, going to work, looking after family and friends, volunteering, or whether it is using the time for focused prayer or using it to prepare for what comes next, waiting does not need to be idleness, unless we genuinely need a moment to rest. And this is true even if what we do in the interim doesn't look like it's working. The disciples worked all night and caught nothing. But it wasn't a waste, because working all night on the sea put them in the exact place they needed to be to see Jesus. And if they weren't tired and hungry, they might not have listened to his instructions. Which brings us to the third and final thing I think John 21 highlights. And this is being ready and open when God does turn up and speak to us. Even if God comes to us in a completely unexpected way, in an unexpected person, or if the message seems counterintuitive. The disciples didn't realize that the person speaking to them from the shore was Jesus. They really had no reason to do what he said. Yet they were open. Perhaps they remembered that Jesus had already appeared in a form that wasn't immediately recognizable. Perhaps it was just that they were tired, hungry, and recognized that they had nothing to lose by letting the nets down one more time on the other side of the boat. But they were open to trying something different. They were also open to something that they weren't sure would work. To this day, experienced fishers on the Sea of Galilee know that the best time to fish is always at night. Even so, even though it's daytime now, Peter and the others, they give it a shot. let down their nets and bring up the biggest catch of fish they've seen, well, since that first day that Jesus called them to follow in the first place. So again, I think here in John 21, we see some things that we can do as we are waiting on God in our lives. To act on whatever direction God has given, even if it's not a lot. Do something worthwhile while we wait. That's regular activity, prayer, and preparation. And be open to God showing up in unexpected ways and asking us to do things differently. And I think these are principles we can act on no matter what we're waiting for. Whether it's something in our personal lives, whether we're figuring out, should I look for a different job? Should I sell my house and move to a different community? Many big decisions come and it can be hard to know what to do. Or just waiting. What do I do while I wait to get that treatment that I need? What do I do when I'm waiting for? And you can just add one thing after another while we are waiting. And it's something that we can do, and I think we have done as a church here through this New Beginnings process. Again, it's taken us a while to get here. It's involved a lot of waiting while we were figuring out. It meant entering into this process in the first place, knowing it would take a while. When there was a desire, well, we need to do something. We decided to wait on God. And then we had to wait a little bit more. But we followed on that direction that we had. And we stuck with it. Stuck with it for over a year now. And we've done plenty of worthwhile things as we've waited. We welcomed Cornerstones into our facility, and that proved to be a wonderful blessing for us and for them. We've welcomed Ancaster Village Church into our space. We've continued our day-to-day ministries, leading worship, pastoral care, things that connect with the community like the textile drive. We've continued to work while we have waited. And there has certainly been lots of prayer and preparation. And certainly as we've gone through this process, I have been so encouraged at the openness that all of you have had to this process, to the conversations that we have had, the willingness to consider new things. And we're going to get to the results of that after the service today. But I want to say that I think very much we have been doing this over the past year. And this is something that we can take with us as well as we work into the future. Because when we wait on God, it is productive. It can help us get to where we want to go. And we have the assurance in John that when we wait and when we act on the light that God has given us, Jesus will show up. And when he does show up, he can lead us into a very fruitful life. Fruitful for us, fruitful for others. When we wait, Jesus shows up. And thanks be to God for that. Amen.